can say you're getting dirt in there?
No, mud. Honestly, in a field.
It's just water. I don't think he has any whiskey left in this thing. I'm just kidding.
Almost like you dip your ginger snap biscuit in seawater.
That is a weird analogy. I'm a little bit tipsy, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, I'm Rian from A Dram Half Full, and whether your glass is half full or half empty, I'm here to help you guys refill it. So welcome. I'm sitting here today with Josh McMullen. He's a lifelong friend of mine and the owner, founder, and head distiller at McMullen Distilleries. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Bit of a work in progress. McMullen Distillery. We're setting up in Lilydale. All passionate about all things whiskey, pot stills, mucking around and kind of pushing the boundaries with the kind of whiskey that we're making. And we're talking about a distillery that pushes the boundaries a bit here today as well.
In all different directions. Like, it's one of those distilleries that if you're walking down the liquor aisle, you can't help but notice. I mean, if you look across this lineup that we've got in front of us today, I mean, it's an excellent lineup. But one thing that always grabs my attention, and I'm sure you can say the same thing, is their design aesthetic choices.
Yep.
It's one of those brands that really is a mover and shaker in the whiskey industry. And they position themselves in contrast to the beige monotony of the whiskey industry.
Well, I mean, beige monotony might be a little bit rough, but they stand out for a very exciting category.
They definitely stand out. Look, it's a lovely category, and I'm not shooting down any of the other distilleries.
No.
We love a lot of the different brands.
No, but these guys are truly among the cowboys, I suppose, as far as design and aesthetic is concerned, and it's very cool.
Yeah, definitely. So, if we haven't even done an introduction, so if you can't read the labels, we're talking about Bruichladdich. It's one of our favorite distilleries. We have been drinking Bruichladdich for quite some time. And Josh actually made the venture out to Scotland a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's about a year and a half ago. So we went on a honeymoon, my wife and I, and we agreed, if I suffered through 2 weeks of Italy and France and coastline, that we would spend the third week in Islay, which was fantastic, visiting distilleries. And, interestingly, Bruichladdich was on my radar as a whiskey that I was very fond of from the Islay region in the western part of Scotland on those little isles. I was very excited about Bruichladdich going into the trip, more so Lagavulin, Ardbeg as the two who really stood out to me. But on that trip, and we'll get to it soon, but it was this bottle that made me go, I have not paid enough attention to Bruichladdich, and since then, the interest has developed.
It's just exploded.
Yep.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we were talking the other day about how we have had our eyes on the Octomore for many, many years. And it wasn't until about a month or two ago that we both just somehow managed to grab ourselves a bottle. Yep. And before you know it, just look at the lineup in front of you. We're drinking some of the best whiskeys from the distillery. So Josh, do you want to, let's maybe introduce each of these and then we can crack a dram, because I feel like it's pointless having a whiskey podcast.
100%. So just one of their main slogans they talk about is being progressive Hebridean distillers. Hebrides being western part of Scotland, the Isles like Jura, Skye and Islay. Progressive being they've got a very kind of adventurous approach, I suppose, with their marketing.
Their brand slogan is an antidote to the industry, right?
An antidote to the mundane, I think they said.
Yes.
Yeah, yep. And we'll talk through them, but this first one here is their Bruichladdich Islay Barley. They have 8 farms. I think it might be 7, but I have a feeling it's 8. Hence the name Octomore for this bottle here. They have 8 farms on the Isle of Islay that they grow barley on and they use to make some of their whiskey. So this is the Islay Barley release, this one here. And their Octomores, which we'll talk about later, there is a release that they do with their Octomore each year that is all Islay Barley, which is really cool if you want to just get the taste of that Isle in a glass. So this first one here we've got is the Islay Single Malt Scotch Whiskey, their Islay Barley from 2013. It's an 8-year-old in... They don't say what casks they had this in. I would hazard a guess it was... ex-bourbon casks. We'll find out.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's put it to the glass and actually let that be our experience. And we can probably maybe guess a couple of the notes and, it might give away some of the some of the... Oh, man, that's a generous pour. Thank you
Oh,
very
sorry,
much. Nothing wrong with that.
Yes.
All right.
Oh, no,
I mean, off the bat, that is very delicate. It's barely straw colored.
Can you see it in the camera?
We'll get some footage in B-roll, guys. Don't you worry about that.
I just realised how quiet this part of the episode's going to be.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I get this like kind of like clean minerality. There's a very like kind of like subtle mineral note that's going through there, and I could even pick out some floral notes also.
Minerality I get with a lot of the Bruichladdich releases, but there are some distilleries that I find will have a mineral note that leans a little bit more into the note that always comes to mind for me is my grandfather growing up always had a spa in his backyard. And the spa, when it would get drained, you'd have the wood that makes the outline of the spa was soaked in all the minerals and kind of just things that the spa has in it to kind of keep the water at the right chemical, whatever level.
Alkaline level or whatever.
Alkaline level, whatever.
pH
But you'd get this oaky smell out, or this woody smell out of the spa, and you get all these minerals. And some whiskies, I think, go a little bit too heavy into that, but Bruichladdich...
They balance it quite nicely.
Really balanced,
But I think also, especially with something like this, the water plays such an important role in the flavour of the whiskey. And Bruichladdich sources all of their water from a natural spring on Islay. So one thing that I absolutely adore about this distillery is it's almost like a bit of a closed loop system. They're B Group certified, and they like Josh mentioned earlier, they actually do they've got a network of barley farms on the island and throughout Scotland. And they are very, very proud of, sourcing a lot of the natural ingredients and core materials for their whiskey from Islay. And I think that really helps create a signature brand because it's so important to them that it's all kind of like homegrown and natural and, sourced locally. And there's not a lot of distilleries that put so much emphasis on that sense of provenance.
Yeah, the art of whiskey making, in a sense, the art of it. They've got we'll put up a photo of it, but they have a still there called Ugly Betty, which they use for making their gin. And while I was there, they were saying they have 2 full-time staff whose job it is to roam the Isle of Islay and to collect botanicals for their gin, which is just so cool.
Yeah, so
cool.
That gin's called the Botanist, right?
The Botanist, yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I actually heard a story about how that still came into being. We're not going to tangent away from whiskey too far, guys, so forgive me for a slight junction, but...
We might tangent.
We're going to tangent a lot.
More.
We've got 5 incredible whiskeys, and some of these are quite strong. We're going to tangent. But the botanical gin came about. They managed to pick up a second-hand still, Ugly Betty, from a ghost distillery that had closed down and was actually completely shut off. So they sourced the still from there in auction. They actually had it shipped up to their distillery on a barge, which I thought was a pretty cool story.
There you go.
And it was laying in their yard for like almost 5 years before they were doing some work on the distillery, and they had to remove the roof to get some other componentry in for some of their other stills. And at that point, they were like, well, we've got an opening to get this still into the facility. What are we going to do? Do we want to make a gin? Do we want to make a vodka? And there was actually a bit of debate about vodka. But one of the owners at the time, he actually was talking about, he was a big fan of gin and tonics. And he's like, I feel like, we could actually tie this into our story. And like you mentioned, partnering with local foragers or whatever the term is, they thought it was a great, natural progression for them to explore. Anyway, sorry, I'm barely talking about this one. So what is this? This is the Islay Barley 2013.
Look, I find for this one, and maybe this is a characteristic of the Islay barley, but it's got more of like a dark toasted barley note to it, not necessarily dark toasted like caramel or sweetness, but a real kind of just barley grainy roasted note.
There's a bit of citrus in there as well, like maybe
orange rind. I thought,
yeah. I'm getting orange rind for sure, but I also get a bit of like lemon oil or something like that because there's something about the texture to this whiskey that just really coats the palate. It's very syrupy. And it almost feels a little sugary in its...
Yeah, it does. It does.
I don't know.
And the nose, you could almost imagine that you're down by the sea and you're not the heavy sea breeze where it's all brine and intensity, but it has got that kind of very light, salty kind of nose about it. And that happens when you're aging casks on an island near the ocean. But it really is characteristic of where Bruichladdich is. Like, you know, the whole point, and maybe that's a good segue to the next bottle, but the whole point of this blue colour that they use in their bottles, and we'll put up a picture, but at the front of the distillery they have the Bruichladdich name written on the front of each barrel, all in this blue. Is that's the colour blue of the bay or the ocean that sits just at the front of the distillery there.
I almost I know marketing positioning is all about creating a story out of these kind of elements, and I wonder how accurate that is. I've never been to Islay. I can't talk to the color of the water, but is it really that blue? I mean, I might be insane.
Not on the day I was there. In saying that, it is Western Scotland, and it's quite possible that the sun only comes out to make it this blue
during
once every decade.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Maybe this was a real special day, but it is genuinely actually a beautiful spot. It's not a gross little beach. It's pretty.
Fantastic.
As is this next dram.
Let's do it.
Classic Laddie.
Classic Laddie.
I love this bottle. I know this isn't all about marketing today, but if you said to someone, make me a whiskey bottle that stands out,
that's gonna do it. It's gonna do it 100%. So, like you mentioned just previously, the color of that is based off the ocean color of Islay during maybe a certain summery season. I would imagine that's just how I see it. But the brand has partnered with a design agency and a marketing agency called Thirst, and they were kind of like the pioneers behind the rebranding of the distillery when it reopened in 2000.
Yep.
And they've chosen a very unique bottle. I mean, the shape is pretty mundane, I guess.
It's almost military.
I see that.
These kind of big ridges on it,
Yeah.
and the heavy writing, and
even just the use of the bold simplified sans serif font. And we won't talk too much about design. That's my side project. But I feel like it's just such an eye-catching whiskey, and it really draws your attention to the brand. But I can imagine it's not for everybody. So yeah. Anyway.
And you can see now. So this is, like we said before, this is made with barley from that island. This is not. Well, it might be in part, but it's not exclusively. And straight away, can you pick up that different note in terms of just the grain?
Yeah.
Because these are both unpeated, meaning that, so peat, for those of you who don't know, it could be a whole other session, but basically years and years and years pass, and the kind of marshy parts of your island, of land, of wherever, will get compacted down, and you'll end up with this really kind of dense bit of vegetation a couple of meters underneath the ground, which is made up of years of wood. It
compacts and it compiles and it compounds.
Herbs and stuff. And traditionally, you'd cut that up into bricks, you'd dry it, you'd burn it, and that's how you keep your house warm. And they would often do that in parts of Scotland like Islay, because it was much easier.
And they didn't have much fuel like trees and forest and shrubbery.
To use that to stay warm.
Yeah.
And then obviously some wise person decided that they would use that to dry out their barley when they were making their whiskey, and who knew putting smoke on barley adds a smoky taste to the whiskey that barley is used to make. So these ones do not have that smoke in them, but they still have a real kind of oceany...
I completely feel like I'm being transported to the side of the ocean.
Yeah.
Like, it has this kind of saline quality to it, and it's very... Oh man, so much of that salt brine and stuff is coming through. But I wouldn't say brine per se, but it definitely saline is coming into the palate. Man, I'm getting a lot more robust citrus fruits in there now, and maybe even a little bit of it's not necessarily mandarin, but there's...
I remember I had a bottle of this keeping me company during our lockdowns. Perish the thought.
Did you snuggle up to it at night?
Yeah, it ended up being salty from my tears, not from the whiskey. But it's a note that I got then and I still get now is like if you took one of those ginger snap biscuits for you Aussies, in those family share packs of biscuits, you get those ginger biscuits. It's like that, but with almost like you dip your ginger snap biscuit in seawater.
That is a weird analogy.
And you get this salty ginger butter kind of grain. It's a good note. It's what it is.
You know what? These are the kind of tasting notes that I love the most. We can talk about, mandarins and pears and all that kind of jazz. But when someone pulls out like a memory or a very abstract note about dipping biscuits into seawater, That's what I love about whiskey. It is so subjective to it's up to the eyes of the beholder to really interpret it, and it's so damn subjective.
I feel, when I'm tasting whiskey for me, I'll imagine a scene or a scenario or something that flavor reminds me of. And sometimes if I'm smelling something and you don't, you're thinking of a classroom when you're a kid and you don't immediately know what the tasting note you're looking for is, it's kind of good to walk yourself through the scene. Like, why is my brain coming up with this memory, and what's the scent or the smell?
Yeah.
It's just ginger snap biscuits for me.
Ginger snap biscuits. I can definitely get the sense of ginger, but I think because of, for me, ginger is very commonly associated with lemon, and I'm getting so much lemon in there. It's very citrusy. But it is. You know what? I do get a little bit of the maltiness at the back there. It's subtle, but it's definitely present towards the end. And
exactly that. You get the maltiness towards the end, but it's fairly sweet on the not to get into that kind of bougie thing, but on the front palate, it's fairly sweet, fairly honey. And when you say lemon, I think of more like a Lipton iced tea kind of lemon than like a citrus bite lemon. But then as soon as you get over that little sweet citrus hump, it goes into this really similar to this, but this kind of mellow cereal note, salt, minerals.
You know what? Cereal kind of hit something in my brain. Yeah. There's something there when you say cereal that I automatically associate with it. So what we've just been drinking, these two expressions, completely unpeated. But we're really ramping things off after this because we're moving to what's known as heavily peated under the Bruichladdich classification.
Yes.
So the Port Charlotte is absolutely iconic, and it utilizes the same cap but a very different bottle. I mean, straight away, they've utilized a very cylindrical bottle, heavy embossing on all the text on the back of the.
If you can see on the back here, all the wording is kind of embossed and. You can show that in post.
I will. I'll bring that up on the B-roll, guys. Don't worry about it. But I think let's jump in because I think it's time to ruin our palates a little bit and move on to something a little bit heavier.
Now, this one I purchased this is I don't know if it is a distillery exclusive.
You can buy it online.
You can
buy it online from the distillery.
There you go.
So does that make it an exclusive to the distillery?
So
hang on. Before we proceed, can you please put that cork in and try that one more time, closer to the microphone? I want you guys to experience it because for us,
it's a good cork.
I know it's the little details, but for me, a good cork pop is a part of the experience.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes. This really takes a step. Something that we've been mulling about for our distillery. Peated whiskey is what I love, what I'm all about. Not everyone loves peated whiskey, and people are allowed to be wrong.
I mean, it's one of those things that automatically divides the audience. I mean, you love it or you hate it, but I think if you've been drinking whiskey for long enough, it's one of those things that I think you definitely grow into and you learn to really love.
But so most distilleries will do a base distillate, so that means when you're making whiskey, you produce your alcohol and then you put that alcohol in a barrel for however many years, depending on what the legislation is in your country. When you make your base spirit, typically what a distillery will do is they won't change that base spirit recipe ever. Unless a new owner comes in, you put it in different barrels and you let the barrels do the expression, but you want the core spirit to be the same. So it's not impossible, but it's not often necessarily that you will find a distillery who has two core range releases that are unpeated and then peated and seriously peated and then into
heavily. So this is unpeated. This is classified as heavily peated. What was this? Is it ultra peated?
This is super heavily peated.
Super heavily. I think that's the definition. That's how they define it.
Unpeated again. But
yeah. So it's kind of interesting that we've saved this one to last because this is. Well, you know what? Let's not spoil anything. Let's get to that.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. Stay around, guys. We're getting to the good stuff.
We picked this up. I didn't actually try this for the first time at Bruichladdich. It was my birthday. We were down in Islay and we went to a bar after having dinner. And this was on the bar's menu. And I thought, okay, I like a peated Port Charlotte. And I got it. And this one has been done in some kind of, Renal can put a little note up here, Mantadillo. It wasn't Mantadillo. It was some kind of sherry cask that was really rich. And I got a tasting note in this one. The only way I can describe it is almost like bread dough, like a really buttery, oily dough. And I don't often find that note in a whiskey, but when I do, I quite like it. So this one stood out as, and this is the only Port Charlotte I own. I don't have a standard Port Charlotte.
Okay, so I mean that's probably a good point. So what we're drinking today is not the standard Port Charlotte. We're drinking the Port Charlotte heavily peated Islay single malt PMC 01, 2013 release. It's aged 9 years in oak casks, and it's their cask exploration series. So pretty damn awesome.
I think it was barreled in 2013. I don't think it's...
It says 9 years... yeah, you're right. And ladies and gentlemen, this is 54.5% ABV. Now that's pretty significant. And one thing that I'm really excited about, and I'm going to preach this in almost every episode that I do, 700ml bottles is the way to go, guys.
Yes.
I mean,
Yep.
I did a Bruichladdich episode. I might link that now in one of the cards up somewhere over there, or over here, or over there. I don't know. But 500ml bottles is the way to go. 700ml bottles is the way to go.
Yes.
Here I am.
Yes.
Please, ladies and gentlemen, if
you
you're producing...
misspoke. You did a Bruichladdich episode?
I did a Belgrove episode recently, and I was talking about how incredible this whiskey is, and it's at a relatively decent price for the bottle, but it was released at 500 mils, and I feel like you kind of like...
Australian tax system.
Yeah, it's brutal here. But sorry, let's not tangent too far away from Bruichladdich. So straight off the bat, incredible barbecue notes.
Barbecue
central.
Yep. Yep, it's charcoaly. It's not just dry charcoal. It's got that. This is for a meat lover, really, in a sense. It's got that like a pork or like a beef fat kind of rendering over coals kind of smell to it. It's very juicy, very meaty. Still has that mineral note that we've seen in these.
It's so funny because I was about to ask you, do you get that mineral note that's
Yeah,
still in there?
still do.
100%. So it still has that very core Bruichladdich DNA. The bit of sea spray, a little bit of minerality. You know what I noticed the other day, because I was drinking the Bruichladdich Classic Laddie, and I was getting so much copper.
Copper?
Yeah, I was getting copper in there.
Like
a metallic mineral note. I don't know if everybody else gets that, or if it's just me. I'm pretty insane.
Do you get that? It's like you've got a really rich, dense pastry, and then like berries, like fruit and berries. And it's this kind of fruity, oily, salty smell, and it's right at the base of all the flavors. Like if you get your head out of all of the charcoal
smoke
stuff,
and all that.
just this. That's the note that I tasted, and I was like, yeah, this is something that I love.
You know what? I get that for sure, but for me, the pastry, the bread, the dough is a little uncooked. Like I really
totally uncooked. Yeah,
I really get this like raw, natural doughiness to it, and a lot of this like maltiness. It's not super sweet, but the maltiness is very present, and it's very chewy, which I think you mentioned earlier was a quality that you are drawn to.
Yeah.
I myself love it as well.
Yep. Yeah, this makes me salivate, like I'm hungry. Like,
Yeah.
This is a really...
Well, it's one of those ones that draws all of the moisture out of your palate. Like it feels like there's just, I mean, the volume and the texture is an incredible component of the experience of the dram, right? Like it really just, I don't know, rides the palate.
There's a whole story behind this PMC 01 2013 as well.
Is that, it's an experimental cask, right? So I think it's part of their...
I think that's right. Yeah, I think it's an experimental cask.
Cool.
It was a good experiment. Yeah, it's a real...
I mean, you know what? We can't talk too like scientific or, you know, like in depth about like the actual cask system and, you know, like how long they've aged it and, you know, like all the little nitty gritty details, but it is an incredible dram, and it's one of those ones I am constantly drawn to.
Yeah.
Port Charlotte, its core range and its core expression is to die for. It's one of my favorite, like, nice price point Islay whiskeys. Something that if you're into the smoky whiskeys, it's one that you'll be drawn to. But this PMC 01,
yeah,
really good. It adds a bit of difference to the standard core release.
Good. Really, really good. Yeah, if you can get your hands on some of these experimental releases, yeah. I get the sense that these two are probably bourbon casks. I could have done my homework beforehand, but not a lot of sherry notes in these. This has got some real fruit to it. It's good.
Definitely. All right. What do you reckon?
On to the
next. Cool. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Now we're moving on to some serious whiskey.
This is an Octomore. It is probably almost certainly the most highly peated core range release of any distillery ever.
For you peaty geeks out there, it says on the bottle, back of the bottle here that it is 128.9 ppm. Now that's part per million, and that's referring to the particles of what's the
of peat in the liquor.
Yeah, there's a technical term there that we're missing, but that's all right. Keep going.
Yeah, so by comparison, I think these standard Islay ones are normally around 20 to 30 ppm. So this is high. So the day I was actually down at Bruichladdich, they were making Octomore. They have a 145-year-old mash tun that they were churning away their Octomore barley in. And I tell you, the Octomore spirit is awesome, but being in the distillery while they're grinding up and brewing this barley and distilling it, and I imagine
like all the smells are just kind of like infusing into you as you're like walking through.
We went through the barrel warehouse afterwards, and it was just barrel after barrel after barrel of Octomore, and I was really...
I'm so jealous. I feel like I really need to make.
I got so distracted looking at these barrels that they locked me in the barrel warehouse, and my wife had to remind them to let me back out. So,
I mean, that's probably a good place to be locked in, though, right? So,
that's good.
All right, before we jump into it, so we're drinking the Octomore Islay single malt Scotch whiskey. This is their super heavily peated. It is aged 5 years. The cask type. Do we want to reveal it, or do we want to taste it first?
Yeah, go for it.
Cask type is Olk, Amk, and Pack. Do you know what that stands for? I'm sitting here thinking like maybe I should have done a little bit of research beforehand.
We'll put those down the bottom here.
What do you reckon? Oloroso, yeah. You know what? I don't know.
So guys, we'll get back to you. They do 3 releases of Octomore each year. There's so let's say 14. I think this is the 14th release.
So this is the 14.2.
Yep. So each year, in the 14, for example, they do a 14.1, 14.2, 14.3 are their core Octomores for the year. The 14.1s are done in a bourbon barrel. The 14.2s are done in European oak casks, which usually means they're done in some kind of sherry or wine barrel. And the 14.3, like this little guy down here, is done exclusively with barley from Islay. So it's a local, super heavily peated dram. This is that
4.2. So they're utilizing some sort of fortified wine or something like that. Looking at the code system on the back, OLC, I'm assuming that's Oloroso sherry. I mean, I know sherry doesn't start with a C, but my heart goes to that.
Oloroso cask, it might be. C for cask. Yeah.
And you know what? Let's see if we can identify it. Hey, cheers. I don't think we've done a cheers today. So cilantro, guys, if you're drinking at home with us.
Straight away, it's wild to me. This is more heavily peated than this.
But it's smoother.
But it is.
It hits you in a very different way.
Barbecue takes a backseat to fruit.
Yeah, fruit really is one of the predominant flavors that I'm getting out of this. I mean, how can it be so smoky and yet so different to the Port Charlotte?
Interesting that this one is 5 years old too. The longer you age a whiskey, the more that those peated notes will kind of disappear from it. This one being 5 years old, often the Octomores are younger because they're meant to be a really intensely smoky dram. But yeah, this is not in your face smoke at all.
Well, I was looking into Bruichladdich as a distillery a couple of weeks ago, and I was listening to this podcast, and they were talking about the fact that they don't like to necessarily release super big age statements. I mean, they have in the past. They've released 40-year-olds, and they've recently released a whole range of 18s and all of these other kind of age statement whiskeys. But a lot of the drams that we're actually drinking here today don't have a specific age classification. And what they were saying in this episode was that in one of these podcast episodes I was listening to, was that for them, an age statement isn't as important as a quality spirit. And they like to make sure that they're using very well-sourced, high-quality raw ingredients, from the water to the barley to, every single component that goes into their whiskey. And the age statement, when the whiskey is ripe and ready to be, I guess, harvested from the barrel, that's when they're happy and content with releasing it. And if it's a 5-year, beautiful. And for a lot of whiskey enthusiasts out there, age statement can be an important factor, but for people that have been in the industry for a while, you should be aware that it's really not a critical component of a quality dram.
Flavor is the important factor.
Well, 100%. I mean, it's such an experience that each individual goes through. So, like, as long as it's enjoyable, it's well integrated, and any kind of like harsh or brutal notes are kind of like mellowed out by maturation. That's kind of like where it's at, right?
That's it.
Anyway, sorry. So the Octomore 14.2.
I'm getting so like if you had a soup brewing, like butter and herb notes, and I don't know if it's nutmeg or turmeric, but there's like a really bright and kind of intense.
I think it's turmeric, man. I think it's turmeric. Yeah. It's funny that you say butter, because I was actually thinking, like, and I've never done this in my life, but I'm imagining you're on a saucepan, you've got a whole bunch of sultanas that are just kind of marinating in butter. I don't even know if that's a flavor that I necessarily like, when I think of, I'm like, oh, I love that idea. Like, that sounds great. I don't know if anyone's done that before, but for me, there's something like really delicious and scrumptious about that. And I'm getting a lot of that in here.
I get some of the, is it dill? I don't recall. In Scandinavia, so like parts of Finland or Sweden, when you're having a soup, they'll garnish it with this like green.
It probably is dill.
Is dill. I'm smelling it, and it's reminding me of a buttery salmon soup that I had in Finland.
Oh, yeah, probably is dill then. Hey.
With dill on it. Yeah, cool. It's got this really bright herbal note, despite being like a heavily, intensely peated whiskey.
That's interesting. So I think I see where you're coming from the dill perspective. There's a subtle herbaceous kind of like element in there, but I don't know if I'm necessarily getting dill. But look, to be honest, I don't even know how to place it. But for me, like, there is a lot of that saltiness that still comes through. I'm tasting the core DNA of Bruichladdich, and that's absolutely delicious. Yep. There's a lot of red fruits, a lot of sweetness. Sultanas is kind of where my heart is. I feel like sultanas is the note that I'm really getting. Smokiness is everywhere, but it's not necessarily taking the front seat on the palate. Like, it's more of like an accent, or like a I guess like a supporting character in this play.
This reminds me too, we had an opportunity to chat with one of the production directors from Bruichladdich last year, just as we were setting up our distillery, and something that he pointed out, that there were lots of things he pointed out that I thought were really valuable, but one of the things he mentioned was that he was a big fan of trickle distillation, meaning when you're distilling, you turn the heat on the still down a little bit, and rather than kind of cooking something quickly as you might do putting something in a hot oven,
it's more of a slower trickle.
It's a slow cook, like you do with a bit of chicken that you can shred apart after it's been in the slow cooker. So they do this trickle distillation, and it means that you get a little bit more reflux. So it means that the alcohol is spending more time in the still before it escapes. And by the time it does come out, it's generally cleaner, it's a bit richer. You're kind of allowing some of these heavier flavors to come up through the still.
So is that for Bruichladdich as a whole? Because I'm struggling to remember.
I don't know if it's as a whole, but I do remember whether it was something he did with Bruichladdich or whether it was something that he was a fan of. But he was speaking about slower trickle distillation.
He was definitely talking about Bruichladdich.
Yeah, I think so.
They run that in the distillery, but I was struggling to recall if it was like a part of their entire process or if it was for select releases.
No, I'd almost guarantee that if they're doing trickle distillation for one, you do it for all, because you don't want your base spirit to change drastically from release to release.
Definitely.
And there's a similar note in this one as well to that kind of raw, unfinished dough I find between these two. It's got a lot of body and a lot of...
So much doughiness. Yeah, I'm getting that. It's chewy. It's very like... scrumptious is the word I would like to use today, ladies and gentlemen. Scrumptious. You know what? I want to try something a little bit different. Like, we've been trying, especially from this Port Charlotte onwards, we've been trying some pretty high ABV. Yes, you've read my mind. Some pretty high alcohol content whiskeys, and I actually just want to do a bit of an experiment and drop. If you need to put a little bit more Bruichladdich, the Octomore in there, you're welcome to, bro.
I might afterwards, just.
Yeah.
That was a lot of water. My bad.
I'm going to give that a little spin just to help it integrate.
That to me now with the water has jumped back to here where you've got that citrus note that went missing.
You know what? I completely agree.
Wow, I can now see how these two are related. The Classic Laddie and the Octomore.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So like...
Did you get more out of that?
So, like, I mean, not necessarily more, but I automatically... It removes the smoke even further from the forefront of the palate, and it brings out so much of that yeasty, malty doughiness.
Yes,
like,
it does.
It's also not as chewy as it was before, which I love in a whiskey, but it's really brought that wheaty warmth, maltiness to the forefront. That's good.
Oh yeah, it's gone agricultural almost, like
it's gone full agricultural.
and that's not said in a fault way. It's not a faulty note. It's not a bad note in the whiskey.
Not even slightly.
But like you're making a product that's its base ingredient is grain, and you're fermenting it with yeast. Like it's a very green agricultural product, and I'm just starting to get greener barley, I suppose, less kind of that kind of roasted barley, more green barley and water and dirt, and like you could be standing out in the field where this barley came from.
So you're getting dirt in there? Like
No, mud, honestly. But like that really rich kind of.
It feels like you're actually like in the land, like really just like taking it all in.
See, like I don't know, smell that. I had more water in mine than yours, but that to me is just
I was into that.
Standing out in a field.
It's just water. I don't think he has any whiskey left in this thing. I'm just kidding.
It was a good note.
It was great.
Back my note up.
Yeah, all right. No, sorry. He's he's a distiller. He knows what he's talking about.
Let's not do that shit.
I get you.
Oh, it's good. It's good.
Man, you know what?
This is an Octomore that a non-peat fan could like.
I think so too. Yeah,
it's not
I definitely agree with that.
That angry.
No, and again, this makes me think of one of the stories that I've heard from one of the head distillers over at Bruichladdich. He was talking about he took his mum there, who was I think 70 plus, with all of her girlfriends. They went to the Port Charlotte restaurant that they have at the Bruichladdich Distillery, and then at the it was a cold winter day, rain all over the place, and shortly after that, he took all of those ladies out to one of the warehouses, and he took them through, and he opened up one of the casks, drew out some whiskey from a barrel, poured it in all their glasses, and with no description as to what they were drinking, he let them just experience it completely blind. They went through and they tried it, and they were saying it was one of the most magical whiskeys they've ever had. And shortly after that, he explained to them that it was actually one of the most heavily peated whiskeys in the world. Now they were automatically like blown off their rockers, and they were like, "Oh, we probably wouldn't have even tried it if we knew that." But they were saying that it was actually really lovely, and I think it actually like talks a lot about how they've managed to integrate peat into their recipe in such a beautiful way that doesn't necessarily, like we're big fans of Ardbeg, Lagavulin, and all of these other Islay distilleries. We love a heavy peaty, like punch you in the face smoke, whatever. But I think how the Octomore is integrated is very, very I don't know. It's very artistically like integrated. I think they've done a beautiful job of that.
It's one of those odd whiskies where the releases are quite different. The 10s and the 11s from the 12s, 13s, 14s. But its reputation, I think, is smokier than the whiskey is. You hear about Octomore being this, like, it's going to punch you in the face kind of smoke.
So challenging.
And some of them are, but gee, they're not pumping this whiskey full of peat and releasing an unrefined, burly, gross product. They make beautiful whiskey at Bruichladdich.
Yeah, I would actually even put myself at a bit of riskier, but to say that it's very elegant. It's very sophisticated. It's very dainty in a way. Like, it still has a lot of character, a lot of body, but it's a beautiful whiskey. And I think if you're a fan of smoky whiskeys, if you're a fan of peat, I think it's one that you really need to try. It's up there with one of my favorites personally. Yeah.
And if you're not a fan of smoky whiskey, but you're open to trying something,
It's a great gateway drug.
Go in with
man.
an open mind. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, we've had an 8, a 9, a 5, and this is a no age statement. So, whatever this is, 8, 9, 17, 5, 22. This is older than all the other whiskies we've had so far combined, being a 29-year-old Bruichladdich Black Art.
So, this is one that you've had on your radar for many years.
This is one of, the unicorns, I think. And by unicorn, I mean the rare, untouchable whiskies that people dream about having. It's one of those ones that you always aspire to buy, aspire to drink, but it's always like the price point does push it out of a lot of people's reach. Only last year, it was Josh's 30th birthday, and me and a handful of close friends all chipped in and bought him the bottle for such a special milestone. And you know what? Enough talk. Let's get into it, eh? Well, actually, let me just read the label for this one quickly, because this is some real... They don't tell you what's in these, and that's quite intentional for these Black Art releases. This is the 10.1. It's 29 years old. The enigmatic arts of the distiller are shrouded by meagre facts. There are dark secrets within, and marking the passage of time alone bestows insufficient heft. Through these unburdened hands, great oak and steadfast principles pass. High art, complex and mysterious, is revealed only to those who see the stars. I got no idea what any of that means. But this is a really good whiskey.
I love that energy.
I'm a little bit tipsy, ladies and gentlemen.
Fantastic. So, as you just mentioned, Josh, we're drinking the Bruichladdich Black Art. Now, this is one of those bottles that a lot of people can aspire to drink. It's one of those like unobtainables. And is this unpeated? I haven't even.
It is unpeated.
Yeah.
It is unpeated.
Okay, so we're moving now away from some of the more heavily peated whiskies in the lineup, and it's a bit of an odd point to put this in our tasting, but we wanted to put this one further to the back because this does kind of stand a little bit separate to everything we've drunk before. Now, I just want to disclose we haven't done a palate cleanse moving from the super heavily peated to this, but the Black Arts is an incredibly special bottle, and it's part of their experimental release. It's one of the ones that the distillery focuses on when they're like it's an expression of the distillery and the distillers that are working there, and it's a bit of a passion project for them more than anything. It's one of their opportunities to explore their creativity and create a release that's completely unique and separate from everything else that we've drunk leading up to this point, right?
Yeah. I think so.
You think so?
You sound like you've researched this.
No, I've Well, when we were looking at buying you the bottle, we looked into it a little bit. Man, that is different.
It's a special whiskey. I'd need to check it, but I'm fairly confident Bruichladdich doesn't bottle below 50%, which is so cool. Because if each of their releases are at least 50% alcohol, you can imagine the other 50% is essentially water. So at least half of what you're paying for is actually alcohol.
It's actually the whiskey itself, yeah.
This is 45.1% though, and that is because it's 29 years old, and in Scotland the alcohol evaporates out of a barrel faster than water does. So over that 29 years time, Bruichladdich tends to barrel, from when I was there, they said around 68-69% ABV, which is high. And that's brought itself back down to 45.1% over time. So a lot of that alcohol has evaporated out, and you're left with this non-reduced but really beautiful dram.
I mean, straight off the bat, the nose is very different to anything we've had so far. I'm getting so much more herbal notes in there.
Yeah.
Like it's getting a little bit of that like kind of saltiness, but it's a little bit more subtle than anything we've had so far.
The mineral notes have taken a back step, and so have... I know that the citrus has almost, for me, gone from
changed. I'm getting lime lollies, like candied lime lollies. So it's changed from like...
Yep.
What I was getting down here was like more... There was pear, there was mandarin, there was orange, and even a little bit of lemon oil. It evolved, and the citrus was... took a bit of a backseat during the heavily peated and the ultra heavily peated. And then over here, it's now manifesting in like almost like a candied lime or something like that.
See, I was actually going to go with like shoe polish.
Yeah, no, I get that as well.
Yeah,
no, I completely get that as well. I completely get
Because
that.
shoe polish is sweetish smelling.
I guess it's got an astringency to it. Like
It doesn't
shoe
taste
polish.
sweet.
No.
Oh, the lolly note is definitely there. Yeah.
Do you get a bit of that, like, kind of like almost like red gum wood? I get like an almost like a treated pine sort of note, and I don't even know if that's like on the record or anything.
I call that note, being an Australian who grew up
playing in Tambark
playing in
playgrounds.
it's Tambark.
Yeah,
It's Tambark.
It's Tambark.
To me, yeah. It's that kind of just hot, dry wood.
Hot dry wood. That's actually perfectly described.
And there's no real smoke there. It's got the same kind of body and oomph as a smoky whiskey, but it's not smoky. It's just really... I've seen a lot of people... it's a thing in the industry where people talk about rapidly aging whiskies and playing sound to a barrel to make it vibrate. And there, for sure, you can increase how quickly a barrel has an impact on a spirit, for sure. But there is no substitute for time. And there's nothing that you could do that would make a 5 or 10 year old whiskey more mature than this 29-year-old. This is a real 29-year-old whiskey.
And just a little bit, like, to add on to that, like, we're not advocates for the older the whiskey is, the higher the quality is. By no stretch of the imagination do we agree or subscribe to that notion. But there is something different that comes with age. Like, you do get a lot more of the barrel influence on your whiskeys, and it's unarguable that the barrel plays such an important role in the flavor and the profile of the whiskey that you're drinking. So for us, we don't agree with the age statement thing, but 29 years is... I'm sorry, I just sprayed everywhere. Talking about sea spray. 29 years is a long time to sit in a barrel, and that flavor, I mean, the oak is incredibly prevalent in this dram.
Yeah, it is. It is. My favorite whiskey, personally, is 9 years old. So age, it's just a note. You might like old whiskies because you get those kind of leather, deep, rich mahogany notes that come out over time, and they're good notes. And this is a beautiful whiskey. Age isn't always better. In this case, 29 years old.
It's done a service. It really
is a
has.
beautiful whiskey.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. The palate is so different from anything that we've drunk so far. It's buttery. It is caramel. It's like soft, marshmallowy toffee. Like, I don't even... It hits the tongue so different.
Yeah.
And I think also because it's a lower ABV, there is a different...
You get more.
It's a different kind of approach. Yeah.
Yeah. I almost get... I'm trying to think of what the lolly is, but you know those lollies with the powdered sugar on them? It's got a dry sweetness to it, is maybe where I was going with that. It doesn't have a sweetness of like an apple or a berry where it fills your mouth. This one, maybe it's the age, but it's almost tannic enough that it dries your mouth out as you're drinking, but it
has to be.
It has this really rough sweetness to it. That's how I describe it.
I think you're right. So the longer the spirit sits in a barrel, the more of the tannins the spirit is pulling out of the actual barrel itself. And I think there is a dryness to it. There is this kind of like tannic blanket of like dustiness that comes through. And that's probably why it's not like a raw sugar. It's more of like a powdered sugar.
Yeah.
Because that kind of coats the tongue a lot differently to other sugars.
I'd guess this wouldn't be a first fill cask, meaning I don't think they've purchased a bourbon cask. This is the first time it's been used, because it hasn't got enough of that tannic oak to me to think that this would be a first fill. I mean, we can't really find out without bribing someone at Bruichladdich. It's got a bit more flavour and refinement, and it's not rough, but it definitely is dry and tannic and complex.
It's dry. Yeah. Man, you know what? After a couple of sips and letting my palate really kind of like, absorb the flavor, the nose has changed a lot. There's a lot more red fruits that are coming through. I'm getting a bit of like almost like a bit of a cherry note or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you get that, but it's almost like a bruised cherry. So there's like, it's a bit bruised, a bit battered. There's a bit of sweetness, almost like it's
Good note.
like if you were to leave a plum outside on a nice hot summer day, and it bakes and it cooks and it like kind of like, you know, wilts a little bit. I'm getting this almost like overripe sweet.
I'm gonna go brown banana.
Oh, no shit.
That kind of earthy. It's still sweet, but earthy.
Yeah. Sweet but earthy, I think, is probably
Yeah.
the most accurate thing we've said about this dram so far. Like, it is very sweet, but it is grounded with this nice dry earthiness.
Yep.
And you know what? Maybe that's a bit of like the mineral spirit that we're tasting. That's kind of with the
Yeah.
age and the oak. So you're getting a lot of the tannins acting with the minerality of the core spirit. And maybe it's the interplay between those two elements that's causing that earthiness.
Yeah, to me, the mineral was much more forward in these. It's present here, but it's almost like the mineral is taking the puppet master now. It's kind of pulling the strings, and it's the minerality is this kind of background, smooth, savoury layer. And then you've got these other notes that kind of come out over it. Because what I mean by that is you can still taste the mineral note that these had, but I'm no longer tasting it going, it's a prominent note. It's just kind of present through the
It's an
entire
essence more than anything.
Yeah,
it's like
yeah.
kind of like it's a complementary element more so
Yeah.
than a feature point. You know what? It's
a good dram.
And I'd also like to just talk about like the duration of this. Like, it's, even though it's a lower ABV than a lot of the whiskeys we've tried before this, the duration is enduring. It just kind of sits around and lingers, and I can't get the flavor out of my mouth, and I love that about a whiskey. For me,
Yeah.
a whiskey, like, I like something that challenges me. I like something that's complex, something that I can really think about and digest and really like contemplate.
Yep.
But to do that properly, I think you need a whiskey that lasts a good amount of time.
Yeah. I mean, some distilleries will, and you know, this is just their business model. It's fine, but they'll water down a whiskey because you want to get it down to that 40%. You want to mass produce and fill bottles. And for me, some of those whiskeys, the water and the whiskey aren't really well integrated yet, and so you drink it and you get the whiskey note, and the water almost chases it down as you're drinking it, and so you don't get, to Rian's point, that long lingering flavour after you've had the dram. This one, the flavour really lingers. And side note, because I thought it was interesting, I was listening to a podcast today about a distillery who, when they want to water down their whiskey before reducing it, which nearly every distillery will do, that's not a bad thing, but they'll take their water, add a little bit of alcohol to it, and then barrel age the water so that when they water down their whiskey, they're watering it down with barrel impacted water.
Interesting.
So you're trying to really push the barrel, and I think that's...
I have never heard of that before. That's
I'm
really
going to try
cool.
a barrel of that when we do a release and
Really
just see
cool.
what that's like.
That's a
Isn't
freaking
that
awesome
cool?
idea.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know
Fun
what?
facts.
Yeah, fun facts with Josh McMullen. You know what? I'm getting a lot more of those banana notes now. I really am. It's kind of like a bit of like a banana bread almost, in my opinion.
Man,
because you
I
get
just
the
spoke
jones.
all about how I thought the mineral note was disappearing, and now I've left it sit in the glass.
Let me have a sniff. Yeah.
And they've come back.
Bit of spa water almost. Yeah.
Yeah, but don't, only on the nose. The palate was so...
And just to talk about the design of this one for a second. So, I mean, as you've noticed so far, each of these bottles is completely unique. They're completely different to one another. Now, for a distillery that's releasing ranges, like this is essentially a bit of their core range. I mean, core range is maybe a bit of a strong word. I think these three are kind of their core range for Bruichladdich. With these being kind of a little bit of a special release for them. But for a distillery to create a brand that is releasing incredibly different branding, incredibly different bottle shapes, and incredibly different spirits is, in my opinion, it's actually unheard of. Like, there's not a lot of distilleries that break the mold and, you know, like challenge the status quo of the, you know, like steering away from their own brand and releasing all these different, you know, kind of like sub brands. That's a unique element itself. But the black arts, it's almost cultish, and there's something like really sick about that I love. And for me, it's so different from the
Classic Laddie.
The Classic Laddie, which is like this bright, vibrant, colorful, you know, very modern and elegant.
Looks
and
good in a cocktail
minimalist
commercial.
Yeah,
Yeah.
literally. But this is like, you know, it's got a pentagram on the label. It's very like almost a little bit satanic. to see that, it's a step away from everything that we saw down this side of the table. But I love it when brands like break the mold and challenge the preconceived notions of the industry, right?
To me, the prevailing brand, I suppose, in here is what we said earlier, was that they call themselves the Antidote to the Mundane. And on the same island, only 15 minutes drive away, you've got Ardbeg Distillery, and they really ramp up the whole, going to push the boundaries and look intense and do these intense flavors. And Bruichladdich, I think, probably matches Ardbeg in terms of their creativity and their really flavor-forward, smoky releases, but they do it in like the Ardbeg is the rock star that everyone knows about, and Bruichladdich is like the equally talented indie artist that like, if you know of them, you know they are as good as anyone else out there. But they're just the prevailing thing here is really good quality spirits.
Yeah,
mineral notes, citrus notes, sea salts, honey.
But it's even just beyond like the visual appearance and the flavor profile we're experiencing. For me, what I really am drawn to is the integration in the sense of terroir and like really like connecting with the land, having a network of your own barley. You trip me up. A network of your own barley farms, sourcing natural spring water from the island, using peat smoke from the island.
Cool.
Like I love the narrative behind the brand. And you know, like it was an old distillery that was shut down and reopened multiple times, reopening in 2001. Was it 2000? No, it started in 2000, but they actually started producing spirit and selling it in 2001. So it did, they like formally released to the public in 2001, I guess.
Gotcha. There you go.
Yeah. But no, it's an awesome distillery. And I'm sure by now, if you've managed to stick around for the duration of this episode, you can probably see why we love it so much. If you get an opportunity, guys, like you have to try, at least try some of these whiskeys, if not buy it. Not buy it. I would be recommending.
We're going to have, we're still got a couple more bits and pieces to go, but we are going to be running tastings at the distillery that I am setting up, McMullen Distillery. We're going to be putting barrels down, filling barrels, and as those barrels age, we'll be running tastings and talking you through what we're trying to create, where we're aiming at. So if you want to try one of these, but you don't want to buy the bottle, send me an email and maybe I can integrate one of these into one of our tasting menus, because this is
an awesome lineup.
One of our real inspirations, these guys. Yeah.
Definitely. It's it's one of my favorite distilleries, and they produce some of the most profound spirit. They've got a great legacy and history behind them, and bringing themselves into the modern industry and competing with all of these traditional, brands is such a huge feat. But how they've positioned their brand and what they're creating and the integrity that goes into the craft of creating the spirit that you see before you, it's unrivaled in my opinion. It's one of the best distilleries, and you really need to give it a crack. So yeah, that's pretty much it for me, man.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're 5 whiskeys deep, so that's it from me.
Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And may your days be as full as your glass. And, if you get a chance, definitely grab yourself a bottle of Bruichladdich. All right, speak to you later. Thanks guys. Cheers.